Church family, welcome back to another Daily Hope Devo. My name is Rob Andrews, the high school pastor here at North Coast Calvary Chapel. Today we find ourselves in Romans chapter 4. To start today off, close your eyes and think of a time in your life when you have been given an amazing gift. Like, salvation doesn't count. Think about the best gift that someone's ever given you. For me, it was a little over 5 years ago. My wife, it was the day of our wedding, she walks up to me with this black box, opens it up, and inside hands me this, which is a guitar pick. And on it, there's an inscription that says, "Through Christ I choose you, and because of him I have chosen perfectly." And has the date of our anniversary on the back, 7/31/2015. And I remember her handing me this, and the reason why it meant so much wasn't because it was a guitar pick, it was because of what it symbolized. I knew that on that day, my wife was giving me the best gift that she could ever give anyone. She was giving me herself. In the same way, I was giving her me. I was giving her myself, and I knew it on that day that there was nothing that I'd done or that I could ever do that could ever earn what my wife was about to give me on that day. So today in Romans chapter 4, we're about to read Paul. He's desperately trying to get the early church in Rome to see that God has given them the greatest gift of all time. It is one that they could never earn, and no matter how hard that they tried, it's one that is only received by grace through faith. And so throughout this chapter, he demonstrates that in no way does the Old Testament contradict the gospel of salvation by grace through faith. Instead, the gospel is actually the fulfillment of the Old Testament. And Abraham, justified through faith, is our pattern, and that's who Paul uses. Why Abraham, you ask? Well, Paul uses Abraham as the framework of this chapter because he's someone whose life, as a first century Jew or even like a Gentile, would be well acquainted with. Abraham was the patriarch, or the founder, if you will, of the Jewish faith. He was kind of like their George Washington, but even greater. He was the OG of their faith. And so Paul uses his life as a reference that they'd understand to support two key truths that he is desperately trying to communicate to the early church in Rome. Number one is this revolutionary ideology of being saved by grace through faith, or by means of faith, instead of the doctrine that had become so deeply embedded in their cultural DNA, and that was being saved by the law through ritualistic works, or by means of ritualistic works. And the second truth he was trying to communicate was that Jesus has now made that grace available to everyone, not just the Jews, not just the privileged, not just certain people or certain people groups, but to everyone. And so we'll pick up in verse 4. It says this: "When people work, their wages are not a gift, but something they have earned. But people are counted as righteous, not because of their work, but because of their faith in God who forgives sinners." Now, something really cool here. In the Greek, that word for counted is logizomai. And it was often used in transactional language when describing one's money, or like what would take place at a bank. So literally, this can be read as God deposited righteousness into Abraham's bank account. Ever woken up to money in your bank account? Not really sure of how it got there? Me neither, but it must feel pretty cool. That's the idea that's being used here. See, the idea of grace, it stands opposite to the principle of works. See, works has to do with earning our merit, or our right standing, in this case, before God, in the same way that we would earn like a paycheck. We put in our hours, we want to see the payout. Grace has to do with receiving the freely given gift of God. The freely given gift of God. See, a system of works, it kind of seeks to put God in debt to us, making God owe us his favor because of our good behavior. In works thinking, God almost owes us salvation or blessing because of our good works. In addition, I think, works-based thinking, it also kind of ignores the sin problem. And Paul highlights that in verse 15 when he says, "For the law always brings punishment or wrath on those who try to obey it. The only way to avoid breaking the law is to have no law to break. So basically, and he confirms this last chapter in Romans 3:23, all fall short of God's glorious standard. In other words, even if you think you're perfect, indeed, God's standard isn't just in deed, it's in word and even in thought. And who's perfect in their thoughts? I mean, totally me. No, of course not. Like, no one's perfect in their thoughts. And so Paul actually discovered this as, he was a previously devout Pharisee. And so he discovered that even if we lived the most moral life we could and to the letter obeyed every little thing that God required in his law, that still wouldn't be enough, because sin is more than just an action. It is the inescapable fallen state of our hearts. It is a power at work within us that we cannot save ourselves from. That's why Paul later explains that of all the 10 commandments, he got hung up on the 10th. Why the 10th? Coveting. Well, because it was the only commandment that addressed an issue of the heart. See, Paul is helping the early church and us see what Jesus was getting at in the Gospels, setting the stage for us understanding the necessity of why Jesus needed to come and sacrifice his very life to pay the price. Remember when Jesus said, "Oh, you don't murder? That's great. Have you ever been angry in your heart? You don't commit adultery? Awesome. Have you ever looked at someone lustfully?" Oh, see, sin isn't just, it's more than just breaking the law. The root of sin is actually breaking trust with God, with denying his loving, caring purpose in every command that he gives. See, when we center our relationship with God on law keeping instead of trusting love, we go against his whole plan. See, before Adam sinned, he broke trust with God. Therefore, God's plan of redemption, it's centered on a relationship of trusting love, of faith in who God is and who he says he is, instead of law keeping. And guess what? It's available to all. Not just, you who are incredibly awesome, but to that person. To that person. Yes, even to that person who you hate. I want just to end today with my favorite verse from this chapter. It's verses 17 and 18. It says this, that Abraham believed in the God who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing. Even when there was no reason to hope, Abraham kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations because God had said to him, "That's how many descendants you will have." Maybe some of you watching this today, you've lost faith in what God has promised to do in your life because you're hindered by a works-based belief that says, "Oh, well, because I've sinned, I'm no longer deserving of the good things that God has planned for me." Maybe some of you today, you're starting to lose hope in the dreams and hopes and God-given desires that he's placed inside of you. Maybe some of you watching this today, there's this huge problem in your life or this huge issue that you're being faced with that, quite honestly, you think God is either too small or too uninvolved in your life to care enough to do anything about it. Maybe some of you watching this today are questioning your salvation. Well, I want to encourage you today and ask, what's the common thread in all of those? It's the very same issue that Paul is writing to the first century believers about. You've made it about you instead of making it about what God has done for you. Church, I invite you today just to expand your view of God. Don't lose hope in the things that he's promised you, even if they don't make any logical sense, because he is faithful. He is the God who brings the dead back to life and who creates new things out of nothing. And his plans and promises will come to pass in your life. Think about it. We have already received the greatest gift of all through no effort of our own. God's only Son, sacrificed on our behalf, brought back to life to bring us into right standing with Him. Why do you think He would hold back anything else in your life? Be blessed today, church, knowing that it is by grace we have been saved through faith, not by works, so that no one can boast. It is a gift of God. Love you, church. Talk to you soon.